Well, just reading an interesting article from Zero Hedge, talking about what they're calling the Brexit in, should the UK leave the Eurozone, which they're calling Brexit. And it's interesting because the so-called poll, not poll, but I think it ends, or the official vote or whatever is the 27th, maybe later this month. And it started off with, we're not sure, it might be a close call or whatever. Now all of a sudden, through polling, they're showing a huge lead in those favoring leaving the Eurozone. If that happens, that's going to be the first country of essentially a chain of countries leaving the Eurozone. I am almost certain, this is my opinion though, but I'm almost certain if they leave the Eurozone, Greece will finally say, okay, let's go. What will happen to gold? What will happen to Bitcoin? What will happen to silver should the first domino fall, which is them leaving any country, Eurozone country, leaving the Eurozone as a member? Keeping it, and I'm keeping all this in mind, I'm saying it is 2016. We need a coming year for a lot of turmoil. And then 2018, if all of 2017 was turmoil, and it started in 2016, partway through 2017, they can start getting their propaganda news out there to get everybody ready for a one world currency, because look at all of the problems that have happened, and China's dumping U.S. treasuries, and they're devaluing their currency, and Venezuela has this problem, and now Brazil also has a problem. See, people, if we could just have one currency, there would never be a devaluation, and blah, 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 blah. But no one's going to go for these things unless you feel a lot of pain. So everybody in the world has to feel a lot of pain, including us Americans, because if us Americans say, well, hold on, this quantitative easing and all this other crap you guys coined, from where I can tell, I think it was working, even though it really wasn't. It has not been. Why do we need to join the new world currency if everything's fine here in America? You guys did a great job at the Federal Reserve, and you congressmen and women. Why do we need to join, right? No. We also have to feel some pain. It's the only way they'll be able to do this. So my question is, what happens to gold? What happens to silver? What happens to Bitcoin? During the first country's exit out of the Eurozone, which in this case may be the UK. And their article says, the headlines go from bad to worse for the UK and EU establishment, as yet another new poll this weekend by Opinium shows Brexit leading by a remarkable 19 points. 52% chose to leave the EU against 33% choosing to keep the status quo. This result comes after two polls Friday night showing a 10-point lead for leave, which sparked anxiety across markets. And also, you saw a nice rise in precious metals and Bitcoin, which, from the last video I did, which was actually yesterday actually, Bitcoin was just barely over $600. It's now $673. $600 or 605, whatever, to 73 one day later? This surge in leave votes probability comes despite an additional 1.5 million voters having registered this week, which many expected to increase stay in the Eurozone support. Further anger towards EU was exposed when former cabinet minister Ian Duncan Smith warned that 7 new prisons will need to be built in the UK by 2030 to cope with the rising number of migrant criminals, presumably due to staying in the EU. With market anxiety rising, as one Rivers CIO notes, if Brexit happens, he says gold will soar. So I do say these immigrants coming in, causing all this havoc and the rapes and the assaults and all this stuff, for this guy to come out and say, to keep up with dealing with these criminals, we're going to need to build 6 new prisons, sorry taxpayers, by the year 2030. So even the most staunch, I want to stay people are going to say, I do want to stay in the EU zone, or, as an EU member, but I can't stand to hear another one of these cases of these women being raped or fondled or abused by a freaking immigrant again. The Paris attacks, they said that was also these immigrants, these ISIS members that came in. And in that case, because of that, and only because of that, because I'm still a sheep, but because of that, I think I want to go ahead and have our country leave the EU. So this man, Ian Duncan Smith, gave the right speech to convince a bunch of people that, staying means we're going to have to pay for, out of your tax dollars, prisons for these people, because they're going to become criminals. They already are criminals, but we're going to have to deal with them. We're going to have to put them in prison. So, hey, you poor refugees, mostly women and children, you poor refugees, come over to the Euro countries, all these different countries, open the floodgates. And then we're dumping them in the prisons because a bunch of them are criminals. So many so that they got to build 6 prisons. 7 prisons strictly to deal with the migrants. So, just going to do some simple math and politics here. Illegals, which would normally be illegal, but we opened the floodgates and just said, come on in. They're migrants, one way or the other. They have no job. They cannot fit in within our society, not even kind of. They don't offer any of the skill sets that we have. They've been living essentially in the desert, these small towns with, lucky to even have electricity. And how are they going to come in and fit over here, right? How much is it going to cost us? How much has it already cost us just to bring them in? How much is it costing us now to deal with them and give them some kind of housing and place to live? Simple math and politics says a big fat no. The answer would be cut them off. But since they're not cutting them off, next best thing, I guess we're going to have to leave the Eurozone. And I'm going to change my vote because I really want to stay in the Eurozone. I don't like change, right? People don't like change. But in this case, the change that they've already brought is terrible. We're going to go ahead and leave the Eurozone. So this guy, One Rivers CIO, notes, if Brexit happens, gold will soar. A new poll has given those wishing to leave the EU a remarkable 19-point lead over the remain in Euro zone votes. As the Express reports, the Opinium poll commissioned by the Brexit-backing Brueg's Group think tank is further evidence that the Leave camp is gaining support and delivers the biggest margin of victory for Brexit so far, after giving voters the option of a choice of the free trade agreements with the EU. It found 52% chose to leave the EU, with only 33% choosing to keep in the status quo. Despite there being less than 2 weeks before the crucial referendum on June 23rd, I thought it was the 27th, a further 15% said they still don't know. Well, I'll tell you what, whoever those 15% are, let them hear this man's story again about 7 prisons need to be built to deal with the migrant criminals. Oh my God. Safety, security. Oh, I got to have it. Let's leave. Because if they leave, they can't just all of a sudden continue letting these migrants in and dealing with that. Now we're our own state. Stop. Nope. We don't have to take orders from the EU or anything else. No more immigrants coming in. And as a matter of fact, what's in here, sorry about your luck. We tried. Didn't work out. Have a nice day. As Trump would say, you're fired. Of course, or not of course, of those who voted to leave, the majority, 39%, said that Britain should have some sort of free trade agreement with the EU, similar to the one currently enjoyed between the U.S., Canada, and Mexico. So long as we want to leave, but we're not like cutting you off, we'd still like to have, work with you, trade, import, export. Sure, that sounds good. Speaking last night, Robert Oulds, director of the Bruges Group, said it was important to drive home the fact that a post-Brexit Britain will have a range of options which allow trade with the European Economic Area. Quote, this new poll shows there are a majority of voters who prefer an economic rather than economic and political arrangement with the EU. So yeah, we don't want a political arrangement, we just want the trade economic. And that is the best thing you could have asked for, because again, we watch these unelected EU officials making rules and laws and everything else for all of those countries. We don't need this giant governing body to govern our own government, and thus us. It'd be like some other, like the United Nations telling the United States what you're going to do, what you're not going to do. Those laws mean nothing, and here's our new laws. You're going to have to abide by them. And by the way, if we want to break our own new laws, such as the bailout that happened 2008, 2009, the ECB was not allowed to do some kind of bailout stuff. I don't remember off the top of my head right now, but they did it anyways, and nothing ever came of it. Just, so what? We did it. We're not allowed to. Legally, we're not allowed to. By our own rules, we're not allowed to, but we did it. So is that the kind of government you want? Can't follow its own rules, and then telling you what you can and can't do, and then telling Greece, you're staying with us, you can't leave, and we need more austerity measures, and we need to sell every single piece of public asset that you guys have, privatization, sell them off so we can pay some of that debt back. You guys can pay some of that debt back. Debt which you can never ever pay off, will not ever even come close to paying off. And by the time we finally let you leave, we'll own all that stuff anyways. And then we'll just say, well, the debts, we'll just have to write it off. Which is what you should have did in the beginning, because it wasn't payable in the very beginning either. But that's what happens when you have this thing called politicians who are easily convinced through campaign contributions to do what is not even close to being right for the country or the people. Take my fat payday. We're going to keep austerity measures in place. We will even get more austerity measures in place. And then they give Greece all this money, this bailout money, and here's $200 billion you guys need. But you got to do this, this, and this, and this. People are furious. We can't do that. It's too much heavy taxes. You're firing everybody. This isn't going to work. And then they tell them, well, of that money we've set aside for you, since you put in all those austerity measures and you did what we asked, we're not going to make those payments to you. So Greece didn't get it all at once. They make the payments to Greece. And then as they realize, well, yeah, a whole lot less people aren't working, a whole lot less taxes aren't being collected. Listen, you guys didn't quite hold up to your end of the bargain, Greece, so I'm going to have to hold back on this payment until you do some additional austerity, because the taxation part is weaker than we expected, so we need more austerity to make up for that weak tax collection. So we're not even going to give you the payment that we owe you until you comply. Hold on a second. You've already said we had this amount of money coming to us if we did the other things. Yes, that's correct. And you made me sell off all these things, privatization. Yes, that's correct. And now I'm just waiting for you to feed me basically a paycheck, a loan paycheck. Correct. Greece is being gutted. It has been. But as I said, if the UK leaves, I'm telling you, I have a feeling Greece will be following suit so quick. I personally believe, my opinion, they will be right behind them. So it says the new poll shows that a majority of voters who prefer an economic rather than economic and political arrangement with the EU. These include people who might otherwise have voted to remain in the EU, he said. Clearly, we can be free, have more democracy, and be better off if we ditch or cancel our EU membership and join a free trade agreement like the one people thought they were voting for in 1975, this big Euro thing, which isn't actually the case, right? They told you it was, and that's what's going to bring, and it brought nothing of that. Furthermore, many Brits are asking about Ian Duncan Smith's claims the UK already spends $150 million or euros a year housing EU criminals, and that if Britain remains in the EU, 7 new prisons will need to be built in the UK by 2030 to cope with the rising number of criminals. Former Cabinet Minister Ian Duncan Smith has warned 3,993 additional jail places will be needed for EU convicts if current levels of migration continue and if the percentage of migrants who commit prison-worthy crimes matches the rest of the UK population. This is the equivalent of another 7 jails the size of Full Sutton Prison in York, which can accommodate 606 inmates. Mr. Duncan Smith believes that if the UK remains in the EU, the problem will not only worsen in the years to come, with the likes of Turkey, Macedonia, and Albania vying to join the bloc. The Conservative MP and Out campaigner said, quote, "Our prisons already hold over 4,000 criminals from the EU, costing taxpayers more than $150 million a year." Now that's an interesting number. Our prisons already hold over 4,000, so let's round that off to 5,000. 5,000 people cost taxpayers $150 million a year? Well, because of the facilities and the TVs and all the guards and the the sergeants on top of the guards and the lieutenants and the majors, they got the whole chain of command, got to pay for everybody to keep these 5,000 people in jail. Our analysis shows UK taxpayers will have to pay an extra $400 million just to keep EU criminals in jail. It will mean prisons are more crowded, less safe, and less able to prevent inmates returning to crime. If we vote to leave, we can take back control of our borders and send EU criminals back to their own countries. We will be able to keep out terrorists and kick out criminals. End quote. So even the most staunchest supporter of let's stay in the Eurozone, when they hear that and understand that, they're going to say, I don't care how bad I wanted to stay. This just makes too much damn sense. And it's not like they're not hearing about these rapes and assaults and all the crime being committed by these immigrants. They're hearing it. I mean, we're hearing it over here in the USA. Imagine living over there where they're happening. And there's bands of citizens going and burning down migrant camps and crap, which is what has happened a couple times now. They are well aware of it. So that, remember, safety, fear, I'm scared, safety, always seems to win, which is why the powers that be always use that against us. So now it has actually been flipped. Your little terror nonsense has been flipped on back onto you. And finally, as One River Capital's CIO remarked, gambling websites say Brexit's a 3-1 bet against, said the CIO. And if you polled every one of us who wager for a living, I reckon 90% would say the Brits remain. I mooed in agreement, nose nestled and tail huddled in the herd. He mooed back. But the polls are 50-50, margin of error kind of stuff. And they were pretty good in the Scottish referendum, the London mayoral vote too. Well, I could have swore everyone thought the Scottish referendum was rigged and the London mayoral vote rigged too because they just hired a Muslim to be their mayor. So if that's the case, then yes, expect Britain, UK to stay, and it'll be like we always see, 51-49. Oh, they just squeaked it out. They just squeaked it out. It was so close. Can you really imagine any country on the face of the earth being split 50-50, essentially? Just complete opposite. 50% want something completely radical, and the other 50% want something just as radical, which is the opposite. We all have the same TV channels. We all have the same internet. We all went to the same public schools. I mean, right? We're not all foreigners coming in to some new country called the United States and then trying to decide on what's best and what's not. If that's the case, then you might see a crazy, weird vote because it's not the same culture. It's not the same people in the nation. It's completely different. So when I hear numbers like this, it always tells me, this is rigged. So it remains to be seen what how the official vote goes, but I guess we will wait and see. So what do we got? Another 2 weeks, roughly, week and a half, 2 weeks, and about 2 weeks, and then we will find out what happens. I'm not going to be shocked if the votes say, oh, they just squeaked out a win and they're going to stay. We're going to stay. But when I hear the WebBot stuff telling me what to expect in the near future, makes me think that that's not going to happen and that they're actually going to leave. And the other thing is that Lindsey Williams said, you would see the big problems in the euro first. When the euro starts to fail, you'll have but a few weeks to get your stuff in order in the United States if you haven't, because it's going to come here in that order. So if you have a country like Britain, UK, whatever, leaving, that's not just one of these jabroni countries. That's like, front and center kind of a thing. Leaving. Then all of a sudden the euro, people might get nervous about the euro. It's not as strong as it was. They just had a country leave. It's not just any country. It's freaking the UK, Britain. Then another country say, well, we're nervous. We're going to leave, right? Which could start that chain reaction, which is going to put the euro in trouble, which then says, according to Lindsey Williams, it'll come here next in the United States. So the other side of this is that what if vote rigging or not, or maybe not or not, vote rigging, yes, let's say, but they rig it this time to actually leave. The club wants Britain to leave because they want to get the collapse to start. They have a reason to blame it on. The EU started breaking up. They made bad decisions. Started in Britain. They shouldn't have done it. And then this country got wind. Then they did it too. That's what caused the worldwide economy to collapse. Not us bankers and the quantitative easing times 5. Banker bailouts, too big to fail bailouts. Nobody went to jail. None of that. Derivatives, trillions of dollars. Nope, that's not the reason. It's because Britain wanted to leave. So it almost seems like they are going to let this happen. They want it to happen, but only when they want it to happen. And if right now's the time, then it's going to happen. Take care.